The Ford government plans to appeal after a provincial court strikes down Bill 124. The Ontario court says the law, which capped most public sector wage increases at 1% per year, violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
This is a win for nurses and for all public sector workers whose rights have been trampled repeatedly by the Ford government.
As Minister Downey, Attorney General Downey said, we are assessing and we will be appealing that.
Okay, so where does this go from here, other than court, obviously? It's time for the Power Panel. In Toronto, Pomp and Circumstances, Amanda Alvaro. In Ottawa, Summa Strategies, Tim Powers. Political commentator Kathleen Monk, and Hill Times managing editor Sherelle Evelyn. Hello, gang. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Hey, David.
Hi.
So, Tim, legally, I guess the Ontario government really has no choice but to appeal this, but politically, is appealing this the right thing to do?
Well, I guess they think there's some appeal, but it just, I don't know. I scratch my head at this government because I think when Doug Ford focuses on governing, he's actually pretty good at it, and he can be reasonably pragmatic. But you get into all this gimmicky frigging nonsense, and this is a gimmick. It's a bargaining gimmick. I'm sure there are very reasonably well-paid lawyers in Ontario's Department of Justice who understand the Canadian Constitution and the right to collective bargaining, who would have advised, you know, you're smoking a bit of ganja here, Premier. Maybe that's good for your health to smoke, but it's not so good in the long run. But there's an audience that this will appeal to for Ford as he tries to go into negotiations. But why does he always have to start there? I think he could actually make an argument that many people would understand without the gimmicks about the cost of everything and trying to manage pay increases in a reasonable and responsible way instead of leading with this. I don't know why they always do it. It's just like the notwithstanding clause in some ways with the CUPE workers. Just sit down and talk and make the public argument. There's a lot of the public who empathize with the financial responsibility the Premier's trying to adhere to.
Right, but Kathleen, now this is the second. I mean, this is a defeat, right, in that the court said you can't do this. You can't violate the constitutional rights. Bill 28, where they bulletproof themselves from this sort of illegal defeat, they backtracked on in the face of growing opposition from private sector unions and others. I mean, where does this leave them now as there suddenly looks like they're going to keep fighting the Bill 124 fight, maybe all the way to the Supreme Court, because that's typically where these things end up?
Yeah, hasn't November been an interesting month where we've seen Doug Ford and his advisors' contempt for collective bargaining rights on display time after time? Literally every week, it seems another example of his contempt for collective bargaining rights is raised again. I mean, the bill that was written in 2019, Bill 124, trampled on workers' rights to collective bargain. He could have just said we need to restrain for some reason. He could have said, let's get to the table, you know, we're only going to pay out a certain bit, but he didn't. He created a law, a wage suppression law, to suppress the wages of public sector workers. I'll point out to you, largely women in those public sector jobs, a lot of them nurses, but also university teachers, you know, government employers and teachers. And he said, you know, he created a law to suppress their wages. So at the bargaining table, they couldn't do anything else. In fact, they couldn't strike on this particular issue either because of the law that existed. So, I mean, Ford is going to fight it, as Tim has said, as you have said. He's going to fight it because he loves hiding behind these kind of legal challenges, delaying, putting off. It's going to cost Ontarians so much money to fight this bill, and they've already been proven wrong. What was interesting from the judge's opinion or decision yesterday was actually he went back to 2019, and the Ford government at the time said we need to make this case because of the situation that the province of Ontario is. Well, it's not just the judge that made that case that Ford was completely wrong, that they do have the room to pay and bargain fairly with workers. Economists after economists have said that. I mean, if he doesn't have the room to fairly bargain with workers who support this province and keep it running, then why can he give all the gimmicks away, the free license plate stickers and the gas tax off and all the other trinkets, like giving parents like me tutoring money? No, invest in the workers that deliver the services.
Well, you scooped me, because that's where I wanted to go next with Sherelle, was the fact that the judge made this point, right, that there was no great financial emergency, because you do get situations where provincial government is hurtling towards a financial crisis, and they've got to do difficult things like this. But Sherelle, this was happening at the same time. We're all getting refunds for our stickers on our license plate. Checks are showing up. I know there's an election coming and all these things. But, when that kind of stuff gets called out by a judge, that's a bit of a bad look for a provincial government, isn't it?
Yeah, you would think so. I think most reasonable people would say, okay, hang on a second there. I believe that the amount was something more than 10 times larger than the savings on the license plate sticker refunds that would have been had from the wage suppression. So the fact that you can't really go out and sell yourself as being, I'm for the people. I'm here for the little guy. Ontario's open for business, and all of these other things. When you then can turn around at the other hand and have somebody like a judge who is supposed to be as I suppose non-objective as they come and say, hang on a second, like you might be not cooking the books here, but not necessarily being as transparent as you could be on this. I mean, to your earlier point about, is this something that is, a good political play? It seems that to go back and appeal right now, especially in the situation we're in now, because if the argument was that, okay, a few years ago, we are in tough financial situation and we need to manage the deficit. And now we are in an incredibly strained, for example, healthcare situation, right, to then go to the courts and say, no, we really need to keep this law on the books that only pays nurses a 1% wage increase when, people have been fleeing the healthcare system in part because of the province's refusal to pay people more. I don't know how that can be sustained going forward.
So, Amanda, where does this leave the Ford government with unionized workers across Ontario? Because this is public sector, and they've always tried to parse in terms of winning political support the private from the public. But it was the private sector that rallied to the public sector on the notwithstanding clause use in a massive way. And now here it is, another setback on the organized labor front for the government. So where are they now with this massive important part of the Ford coalition?
Well, I can't imagine they're anywhere right now. Whether it's education workers or nurses or other frontline workers, they are putting up major barriers in the relationship between themselves and the people who are delivering on the services that Ontarians need and need more than ever before. I mean, we're in a healthcare crisis. You just have to show up at a hospital to see how overstretched it is and to look in the faces of those frontline workers, the personal support workers and the nurses, the people who have put in all of these hours through through a 2-year pandemic and are still not on the other side of it. And then to not read the room enough to say, we will appeal this. And I understand there's legal reasons to do that, but I think that they're in a really precarious position when they do. I mean, when the justice says, you've infringed on these constitutional rights, and as it's been pointed out, well, you're giving out these tax cuts, that is a very bad look for this government. Not to mention the fact that, listen, these are individuals, these are people who I think really have the empathy of the Ontario public right now. People want to support our frontline workers. And when we're watching them leave the profession in droves at a time when it's critically important for them to stay, the Ford government needs to take a new line on how they're going to be dealing with unions and how they're going to be dealing with collective bargaining and how they're going to be dealing with our precious public sector employees.